Hello, and welcome to this edition of Life's Tough, You Can Be Tougher. Our first podcast was nearly 2 months ago, and since we started, we've had an impressive selection of intriguing guests and plenty of free-flowing conversation. I'm Dustin Plantholt, your host. This is a show about life and purpose. It's about the stories we all have. Everyone, when you think about it, has a story. Some stories may sound more riveting than others. That's to be expected. Not every story, after all, is the basis for a blockbuster movie or an HBO series. Yet when you think about your own story, the most important thing to consider is what you will do with it. Or, to put it another way, what will your legacy be? We're looking forward to another terrific show today with today's featured guest, Jesse Lund, Global Head of Blockchain Solutions at IBM. But before we begin, I want to welcome a new Life's Tough sponsor, Cloud IBIS, the People's Cloud. CloudIBIS.com is the platform that enables you to own the cloud and sell off your idle resources through our unique blockchain marketplace, exchange, and community portal. Start your free trial today by visiting www.cloudibus.com. Life's tough, but the cloud doesn't have to be. Now let's introduce Jesse. Jesse Lund is Vice President for Blockchain and Digital Currencies at IBM. Since January 2017, he's been the global head of blockchain at IBM, working to advance the commercialization of a distributed ledger technology to promote social good and transform the world. Prior to that, Jesse served on the Executive Steering Committee at R3, an industry-wide collaborative for blockchain technology, where he represented the interests of Wells Fargo. His affiliation with Wells Fargo also included tenure as head of its Innovation Labs, a unit that developed advances in a range of technology areas, including blockchain banking, digital currencies, cross-border payments, and cybersecurity. After graduating from Pepperdine University with a degree in finance, Jesse went on to earn an MBA in marketing from the Pepperdine Graduate School of Business. He also has a master's degree in theology and ethics from Fuller Theological University in California. Let's bring him on now, Jesse Lund. Hey, Jesse, how you doing? Glad to have you with us.
I'm doing great. Thanks, Dustin. Thanks for having me.
You got it. So you're based in California, I believe?
I am. Sunny Southern California is where I am today and where I hail from. Yeah.
That's great. Well, we're looking forward to conversation. So a lot's been going on in the market these past days. So I was able to ask the Reddit community a number of questions, things that they wanted to ask you. So with that, let's talk about IBM Blockchain. Why was it created? And can you give us a little bit of timeline of when you got involved and where it is today?
Yeah, well, I think I got involved, as you noted, about 2.5 years ago with IBM. But my involvement with blockchain goes further back than that to maybe 2013, 2014, when at Wells Fargo we were doing an analysis for the capital markets group on this new thing called Bitcoin, and capital markets wanted to
Wasn't Bitcoin on 60 Minutes last night?
Yeah, exactly. So it's become a household word, and so that's how I got involved and kind of how I fell in love with the underlying technology of Bitcoin, of course, which is blockchain, and then IBM picked it up and saw it, rightfully so, as a transformational technology that could really change the way businesses interact and transact with each other. And of course, that speaks directly to the core competency of IBM over the last 100 plus years. I mean, that's what IBM does, is helps its clients optimize business processes and business transactions. And so this idea of being able to create new business networks and in the process maybe even reinvent itself a little bit at the same time, IBM sees itself as having the ability to convene new types of transactional business networks, and that's why it was created, and that's why I'm here.
No, that's fascinating. So, what is blockchain? I had Gerald Levin, who's the head writer for our show. He's been struggling the past few days because he's of a generation. He's 62 years old, where he wasn't familiar with cryptocurrencies. He's heard about it, but he hasn't really dug in. What is blockchain?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to explain blockchain, from a very simple sense to very detailed complex and technical descriptions and discussions. I think to start at a high level, blockchain is the convergence of, distributed computing, distributed storage, this idea of consensus, which helps to drive trust among, distributed parties, and then encryption. So non-trivial technologies come together in this, this composition of stuff that we call blockchain, which then serves as the underpinning for, transactional networks and distributed ledgers on which cryptocurrencies are built. And so the best way I can describe it is a new type of distributed computing model that provides the ability to do things that we couldn't do before, the most notable of which is to convert monetary value into electricity, or to use electricity to store monetary value, which I think is one of the interesting use cases for blockchain.
That's a really interesting kind of jump into the advantages that you've been finding. Do you see that everywhere you turn, or each new day kind of brings a new utility aspect where you go, boy, I didn't think about that, or that's a really good way to look at it?
Yeah, and I think that you have to add some level of practicality to it, because Bitcoin or blockchain really can be, I think, wrongly perceived.
You notice that slip you did?
For all,
yeah. You did the Bitcoin slip. I do it too.
Right.
Like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. It seems like it all gets boxed up into one.
Well, I usually don't, but we were talking about Bitcoin. But we have to be fair. Blockchain belongs to Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, blockchain is terminology that comes out of the Bitcoin primer. And so I always try and lend, respect for that or credence to that, because that's sort of where it all started. But it has, it's gone much beyond that today. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of use cases. There's a whole bunch of assertions of how blockchain is going to transform, all sorts of different industries. And I do think it has the potential to do that in the long term. But I also think that there are starting points. There's, practical uses today, and it's not a panacea for all things, certainly.
Yeah. Now, I know there's a lot of rumors in the world going around about who founded blockchain, the actual creator. Do you think it's an American?
I have no idea. So who is Satoshi, right?
Yeah. What do you think?
I honestly have no idea. The only, in this day and age of self-promoting, I gotta think he's no longer alive. Otherwise, he would have come forward.
You would think that somebody would have to brag, saying, "Well, guys, look, I did this." It would be too hard not to.
I totally agree. Or maybe, just the pseudonym has become so legendary that no one's going to believe, the person, whoever they are anyway. But at this point, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whoever they were, or he or she was, they've started, a new technical and social and philosophical movement that's just a snowball rolling downhill.
Yeah, and that's with that website that came out recently, and everyone kind of assumed and thought it probably wasn't. But this person would have probably have come forward. So looking at IBM and where you're headed, can you talk about maybe the global payment system? How is it designed right now? If my wife is from Sweden, for her to send a payment from here to Sweden, there's a lot of fees. Well, are there still going to be fees if I want to transfer money, let's say, through IBM's Worldwire platform, through my bank or through whatever relationships working through?
Well, wherever there's utility, there has to be fees. If there are computers that are, running on a network that, that cost electricity, someone has to absorb that cost. But when it comes to, and this is one of those use cases that we consider low-hanging fruit, this area of cross-border payments, because there's so many intermediaries involved in moving money, right? And the whole art and science of the way that money moves internationally and the way currency gets exchanged for other currencies in the process is really a very arcane system that involves so many intermediaries that there really is a lot of room for efficiency. And so will it eventually be free? Maybe. I mean, maybe it could be, but I think there's several orders of magnitude of elimination of what we call friction, right? Which is the time and the cost and the complexity that is involved in sending money internationally. That improvement alone will be a quantum step forward in both the user experience and the cost that will, kind of open up financial services and access to money to the rest of the world, right? And almost a third of the world is really excluded from that today.
Yeah. So when we talk about custodians, we're the world of right now. My money is in a bank, and now for cryptocurrency, there's different ways to store it, either through cold or through hot or one of the exchanges. Do you see a time where now the banks will be custodians of crypto? And if so, when do you think we should start to see that? Is that within the next 5 years, the next 2 years? When do you see the banks jumping in?
Well, I see some of the larger custody banks in the world already talking about it. So I think you can't ignore it. While banks and cryptocurrencies have tended to be distant from each other for a number of reasons, I think ultimately the economics of how to manage or custody these assets, and that's what they really are, is alternative kinds of assets. The banks are going to get involved in it. I mean, think about it. They're already the custodians of our money. They're also the custodians of something that's even more important than money these days, which is our, personal information. And so why wouldn't they be, eventually the custodians of digital assets as this whole, tokenized economy thing emerges? So, I think it's a great business opportunity for them. And I'm already hearing some of them, talk about it.
I love, Jesse, is that the way that us speculators, that I read 30 minutes a night. I get excited to read blogs by Hordor on the Ripple world. I read things that you've placed or you've put out in your podcasts or different shows you've been on. Overall, the community seems to support the community, that it's not a Ripple versus IBM or IBM versus Hedera, that there seems to be this cross-pollination. Do you find that in the San Francisco scene, in the tech community, that it is very playful and friendly, or is it more cutthroat than any of us really know?
Well, I think amongst at this stage, amongst the direct participants in this, those of us who are trying to build and evolve this capability, there is a lot of cross-pollination and collaboration and a spirit of community and teaming. Obviously, there's this overriding commercial model that we're all beholden to. But really, I mean, you can see that even in some of the rivalries, and let's face it, rivalries, create good content. But in reality, what we're all trying to do is improve, kind of our social interaction. And so the evolution of, the information age and the age of the internet and, breaking down walls that would hold back the flow of information is just being now extended to money and to value. And so, I do think the community tends to work together. Now, there's people who get excited about, like we have our favorite, baseball teams or football teams, our favorite sports teams, and we give each other a hard time and we trash talk, but at the end of the day, we're all enthusiasts of the same sport. I mean, I think that's the best analogy. Yeah, that's a good.
I know that I remember being young and asking people, do you have $50 or do you have $100? My son, 8 years old, we went away this weekend for my little one. She's 6 for her birthday to the Great Wolf Lodge. I'd recommend it to anybody in the Poconos. And on the way, my son asked me when I went, "Oh, the market's up. I wonder what happened. Did somebody place an order?" Or my son goes, "Hey, Dad, how many Bitcoin do you have?" What? How many Bitcoin? And not realizing that the things I'm passionate about, one of these dad things, that my son now is showing interest in this. Why do you think there is this fascination among the younger minds to gravitate not just mommy or daddy, but seems to be more attraction to it than traditional money?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not really sure what's driving it, other than this this phenomenon of social digital connectedness that we have. So we have this already this connectedness to each other as people through the flow of information, and I think again the extension of the flow of money is just a natural progression there. But I mean, that's funny to hear about your 8-year-old son. I have a 12-year-old son who's the same way. He said, Dad, I'm really interested in this whole Bitcoin space, this cryptocurrency space. Can you teach me about it? Can you set me up? So I set him up with a Robinhood account, and put like $25 in it, and he bought Ethereum. He's like, Dad, and he's been looking at it. He's like, Dad, this is crazy, man. It goes up and down in real time, and like, why does it move so much? And then 3 days later, he's like, yeah, I sold Ethereum when it was up at 186. I was like, you did that? And he's like, yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to lock in some profit. This kid's like 12 years old. It sounds like your 8-year-old and him have a lot.
He's excited. It's like a world. He tried to ask me, like, Daddy, explain blockchain. I went, okay, let me try to. You play Minecraft? He goes, yeah, I play Minecraft. So I tried to create this world of saying, imagine that there were no restrictions. As long as you could build it, it would be there. So tell me the problem. He goes, well, I want to have water in the basement. Okay, so you want to dig a really, really deep hole. You want to fill it in. You want to make sure the water can't flow out. Well, blockchain's kind of as you find the problem, there seems to be a solution around the corner that young kids will now probably be involved with, or my son and your son's generation, they will be the next of us. How can young people, how can they be, I haven't seen any training programs yet for crypto, but when do you see that there will be these programs placed in school? Do you think it will be within their generation? Well, they will be learning about this as a new asset class.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know when, but it'll certainly be before, your son and my son are out of, high school, that it'll be, I think more mainstream. And I think we're already, indirectly educating them. I mean, you said your son plays Minecraft. My son played Minecraft for a while, and he played Roblox for a while.
He's doing that now. That's wild. That's what he said.
Yeah. Well, and think about it, and then he's played. My son has kind of been playing Fortnite a lot, and all of these games have monetization components to them where you can buy, stuff inside the game. And so, what my son has already kind of said and surmised is, wouldn't it be cool if I could transfer the value from Minecraft to Roblox, and then I can transfer my Robux, as they're called, to to the Minecraft currency, which is called V-Bucks, right? Mm-hmm. And get that fungibility across the game, which you can't get right now. And that's really, that's a child's version of the exact same thing we're trying to do in real time with cross-border payments, right? Being able to exchange, U.S. dollars for Swedish krona, to speak to your wife, right? I mean, we should be able to, to do that. And so that's what I think is driving this, is this social phenomenon behind cryptocurrencies.
All right. So that's our boys are very much aligned, and you are the innovator. You're out there creating this and being involved in that community to help develop it. So IBM Food Trust, how does that use blockchain technology, and where do you see this going?
Yeah. So the Food Trust solution is another one of the solutions like Worldwire that IBM has invested in, not just as a technology a provider, which is, I think, sort of the historical space where IBM has existed, but also, hey, we're a technology provider, we're an infrastructure provider, but we've been contributing and, adopting this new transformational technology called blockchain. We can actually be part of convening new networks. And so one of the use cases, again, one of the, I'll call it non-financial service related use cases of blockchain, is this ability to track the provenance of goods, right? Or what we would call, supply chain, the flow of goods as they're moving through some manufacturing process, or in the case of Food Trust, as food is moving, not to be cliche, but from the farm all the way to the fork that goes into our mouths, right? Yeah. And there's value in being able to trace that, because you don't want to put something in your mouth that is expired, right? It's going to get you sick or even worse. And so I think one of the other use cases that is, a Food Trust is convening this network where farmers and grocers and all points in between on the supply chain of food can keep track of this flow of food and goods and services, so that we can improve ultimately the traceability when something happens and prevent people from getting sick, right? I mean, that's the ultimate case.
So Jesse, do you believe then within, let's say within the food space, do you think that they are going to benefit most, or which industries do you think will benefit most?
Well, I mean, coming from banking, having spent 20 years in banking, I'm a banker by trade, and I think, ultimately people pay attention when it hits their wallet. Mm-hmm. So I always think that, if use cases that start out with a financial component become mainstream, and maybe that's a little bit of bias on my part, but I do see a definite value in this when you hear about people getting sick from, bad lettuce, and then trying to trace that and to know what other stores it went to so you can prevent more people from getting sick. I mean, that's really good. So it's hard to say, which has the most benefit. I mean, how do you compare, improving the user experience, and, reducing the cost of being able to send money internationally to being able to save lives, right? Yep. I mean, there's some, but overall, it's all about impacting, human life for the better. And I think both of those solutions do that.
All right. Well, like you, I do a lot of reading at night, so I'm going to say some names. You don't have to say you know them or not, but Warren Buffett, Jamie Dimon, and countless others over the years have taken a shot at digital assets. Why do you think digital assets get such a bad rap? And I'll kind of add into the do as I say, not as I do, because the more you dig in, you would see that these individuals are also connected to companies that are investing in the space. So why does there appear to be this do as I say, not as I do? Is there shame? Is it embarrassment? Is it too much explanation for the investors? Why do you think they duck and hide around this? And not just them, but overall.
Well, yeah, I mean, those two guys in particular, Buffett and Jamie Dimon, are obviously, pillars in their respective industries, well-respected guys who have, built, huge, dynasties around their ability to understand and distill things and invest in them. And so I wouldn't say anything bad about them. I know, though, that they're coming from a place of, kind of a traditional model. And I think, again, what underpins cryptocurrencies and blockchain is a social phenomenon. There's a component of a social phenomenon that you have to be part of in order to fully understand and respect. And I think they may have made some statements based on the surface, the
facts they had at the time.
Oh, Bitcoin. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The facts they had at the time. These assets are not backed by anything, therefore they're not real.
Well said.
But as time evolves and they start to see, again, for me, it comes back to the utility of what we're doing with these assets, not the assets themselves. And the fact that they exist in a whole class of themselves, they're not really securities, they're not really currencies, they're not really commodities. There's something new being created and invented.
It's not just a Ponzi scheme.
They're starting to come around.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge. How do you walk back a comment of it's a pump and dump? I mean, it went up to 17 and crashed. Well, that's a Ponzi. And what the time when I'm sure when they're answering these questions is that they're not asked, do you think there's utility or that there are digital assets that do have utility, where it's not just a pump and up scheme. So talking about digital assets and where the market's going, there's been at least recently that this crypto winter is over. What do you think is driving this, and why then do you have another side saying, no, it's not done yet?
Well, I think what's driving, this latest rally, if you want to call it that, is, again, the investment in the applications that make or expose the utility of what we're talking about here are starting to catch up with the hype or the promise. And so I think that's what's driving this latest rally. I also think, just to go back to your last point about, these pillars of conventional wisdom, like Jamie Dimon, are saying, well, I didn't really like Bitcoin on the surface, but I kind of like this blockchain thing. And now, you know what, as I think about it more, we could use this kind of technology to, transform and even issue our own coin, which they've recently come out, to do. And so I think it's a combination of the progression or the evolution in the thinking of those pillars who started out to be naysayers are now kind of coming around a little bit. And at the same time, all of the, leading edge and bleeding edge people, the venture capital firms, private equity firms who are investing in all of these startups in the fintech space, who are developing applications to be able to use this technology, they're progressing too. And people are just starting to see that there's momentum behind this thing that is not going to go away. And it's not unlike the whole evolution of the internet and the .com boom that came and went. And I that was at a time I'm fortunate to be able to, to be able to see both parts of that, because I was just coming out of college when that was all going on, and it looks and feels a lot the same. There's a lot of naysayers of big companies. I can remember Jack Welch at GE saying this whole internet thing, like, what's the big deal? It's just going to go away.
Here's somebody that in his space, brilliant. I mean, in his world, these are the best minds that there are, saying, I don't see it. I don't see what you guys see.
Right. And to his defense, he didn't see it up front, but he saw it later, right? And there's nothing wrong, with that, with coming around.
Well,
so I think we ought to be a little gracious with some of these guys, because they're going to be investors in this stuff too, as you noted. They already are. I mean, J.P. Morgan Chase is now investing pretty heavily and visibly in all of this. Yeah. And
it seems like, though, when we look at digital currency, it was supposed to get us away that one government could collapse the entire system. Isn't now, if you were to have a digital asset, let's say either fully backed by even a group of currencies or one fiat, that it digs you back to one of the same problems you have, in that in order for this thing to succeed, it must have decentralization, that no one, I'm going to say regime, that no one regime could collapse it. So why does there still a group that believes it has to be backed by traditional fiat versus those of us more of the let the market decide what it's worth?
Well, now I think that's a philosophical component of the debate and the evolution of this thing that is still open. I mean, I think you and I might have an opinion that differs, from Jamie Dimon on that one. I think that still has yet to play itself out. I mean, I guess I would ask the question, what is fiat currency backed by?
That's right. What is it?
It's not backed by gold anymore. And so, it's these different layers of abstraction that represent the evolution of different generations of thinking about money and how we think about, money and about, at least in my space. And, obviously there's other use cases. So I think that still remains to be seen. Where I see it playing out in the crypto space, which I think is pretty cool, is the diversity of, I'll call it, of coins that are out there. And I realize, coins can be a generic term that represent securities and that represent commodities underneath, or that represent, more pure currencies. But the reality is, I think we're going to build, availability and, kind of fault tolerance, whether it's truly decentralized or not, is somewhat of an academic discussion for me. If you have diversity, you have resiliency, in my opinion. So, I'm not really sure that in the future, 50 years from now, if everything, if a Big Mac in every country that McDonald's, operates in is priced in Bitcoin versus in, the local currency. And when you're visiting there, you've got to do a mental conversion in your head. Seems to me a better user experience is just price the darn thing in one common currency, and it's a lot easier to think about and a lot easier to pay for.
Yeah, it has that one world currency approach.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, but that all has to play out, and I'm no prophet from that standpoint, but like you, I do kind of pay attention, and I don't think that debate is anywhere near to being resolved yet.
That's a great explanation. There are those who are the Bitcoin maximalists, and I take the stance, it sounds like you do as well, Jesse, of there will be many that survive. There will be many SHIT coins that do not make it because they were never intended to actually work, or they just ran out of time and energy and they didn't have the same marketing providence to survive what happened with this with this bear run or the bear trap that happened over the past 2 years. So going forward, looking at the market as a whole, using utility as being the driving factor, how do people decide? How do you decide? When you don't know, do you see the market at some point, Fidelity or a major trading house, giving people advice of what you should invest in, or When do you think financial advisors will be able to tell their clients, here's what portion of your asset should be in, let's say, a speculative risk, or it may not even be considered speculative at that point, might just be an asset class?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll leave that up to the wealth advisors and the professionals in that space. But I also think that's just one maybe even a narrow segment of the overall space. I mean, I think that there are going to be. I go back to the utility piece, and there's going to be application developers that are saying, well, we're going to use this technology and this protocol and this blockchain and this native asset for this purpose, and the users of their application aren't really going to know or care, right? It's just going to work.
It's all streamless.
So but yeah, exactly. So from an investment standpoint, which of those applications is going to win, and that might drive your investment decisions on how you invest in those technology providers and maybe even the underlying crypto assets that those technologies or applications use. Yeah. I mean, I think the investment, community is going to have to figure that out for its clients, or, like we have, a big contingency of independent investors that are just going to continue to speculate. But that'll all play out over time.
No, that's great explanation. Now I'm going to start with a few questions that the Reddit community has, and we laughed about the name earlier, but I apologize if this is his or her name. Coppateez, Coppateez. First question for you. There's been a lot of debate over IBM Worldwire and Stronghold USD being private, not publicly accessible. Will these onboarding banks and future CBDCs also be doing the same? If so, will that change, and how will that affect the network and public institutional users?
Right. So, So here's my take on the public versus private, or maybe it's the publicly accessible versus permissioned. I think there's a lot of terminology that represent different data points on a spectrum that we have to really think about carefully when we're answering this question. But ultimately, yeah, anybody can come and issue a digital asset on a variety of different blockchains. But if you're going to issue a monetary instrument, at least today, you need to be known to the regulator in the jurisdiction where you operate as an entity that's doing that kind of activity. And that's important, right? Because that provides, security to the participants of the network, right? So Jesse could go issue, a banana coin on Stellar, and, you could go and you'd have to come to me, you'd come to California, and you'd say, well, I bought this banana coin, Jesse, you got to deliver on and give me a banana. That's one thing. But, if you're issuing an asset that represents, some concrete or a discrete, monetary value, you're required to be regulated by the entities that look at those asset classes. And so I would love to see a situation where we have the regulators participating on these networks, these types of networks, and it's more of an open environment where anybody can issue anything, and the regulators, by way of their participation, know about it. But it's going to take time to get there, I think. And so, you could think of it as private, but that's really because if you don't track the source of funds from a monetary value perspective, and you don't at least provide an on-ramp into this, I call it permissioned, not private, subnet of what we're doing, for example, with the IBM Blockchain World Wire, then you're really actually violating the principles of, anti-money laundering practices if you can't verify the source of funds. And that's ultimately a bad thing for humanity, right? Because that's how terrorism finance works. That's how, nefarious, drug finance works. And that's just bad for us, right? So it's kind of like, go with me on this for a while. I get it. We want to get rid of, like heavy-handed regulation and bureaucracy. And I am totally down with that. We've got to do that. But we can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. The the community, like myself out there, we want you to do impossible things. We want to all drive Lambos tomorrow. We don't want the process to work its way. We want you to be hurrying and get it out there. So leading into, it's clear that IBM Worldwire uses XLM for transactions and fees. But how many XLM does each bank need to sustain this new payment rail? Also, how are these banks obtaining XLM? Is it a stellar giveaway, purchasing through exchanges, etc.? This is still from Copites.
Yeah, so great questions. So to go with the first one, how much do they need? Well, it depends on the composition of the average payment size or the payment types that they're supporting. So for remittance payments, for example, which is kind of the place that we're starting, it tends to be low value payments, low value cross border payments. The amount of any digital asset, and by the way, Lumens is only one that we support. Our strategy with Worldwire is to support a growing and open ecosystem, although they do have to be kind of validated and vetted, but a growing ecosystem of digital assets that can be used for settlement, not just Lumens. If you think about the velocity of how fast value transfers on a network like this as compared to conventional, what we would call conventional rails, right? When it goes from days to seconds, what that means is the liquidity requirement is a lot less. So you have to maintain less liquidity because essentially you're reusing the liquidity. It's going to one place, and then you can turn it around and send it to another, as opposed to having to wait 3 days for that value to shift back and forth, which is what happens with traditional payments and international payments and correspondent banking. So it depends is the answer, but it's far less than it is today. So there's even, there's liquidity and, kind of balance sheet efficiencies that are gained by the participants on the network as a result of this too.
That's great. And then let me ask you before we jump into how these banks obtain it, is that do you foresee IBM using, let's say, the top 5 or the top 10 or the top 25 on the crypto market?
Well, the top 10, tends to change over time.
It does, yeah.
We use, and Bitcoin and, Ether tend to be at the top, there's a few others up there. We obviously use Ether, XLM, Lumens, because it's the native asset of the underlying distributed ledger technology or protocol that we're using to manage the ledger of Worldwire. So it's kind of it's a freebie. It's an automatic, meaning that it's automatically integrated with the network. But yeah, it's driven by client demand. Now,
that's going to be XRP then.
Regulated.
We're hardcore fans. You know that, right?
And that's fine. I mean, we will support what our clients demand. To be honest, and our clients on Worldwire are regulated financial services institutions. It can be banks and non-banks. Non-banks meaning like fintechs or registered money service businesses, money transfer operators, whatever they want to use as a settlement instrument, we will integrate, with the network, which is why we started with Stronghold, because they were, I think, the first to issue a U.S. dollar equivalent that's compatible with the Stellar protocol, right? So that's why we partnered with them.
It made sense.
We're in the process of building out this whole ecosystem. So heck yeah, we'll support.
That's cool.
Whatever the participants want to support.
That's why I love the fact IBM is supporting the community.
And that you got to listen to your clients, right? I mean, that's the first rule.
That's rule number 1. So can you explain how Tradelens, Hyperledger, IBM Worldwire, and IBM Food Trust all work together? And is it true that XLM will be used as somehow within these entities, or will there be a mix amount of different currencies that will be used by these entities?
Right. So there's a couple of things there. So Tradelens, Food Trust, Worldwire are kind of the 3 flagship blockchain solutions that IBM has invested in, has been developing over time as part of its overall blockchain portfolio, right? Which also includes, technology and infrastructure, the IBM blockchain platform software, a whole range of services. So we have kind of a top to bottom, stack, a value stack. But these solutions sit, kind of higher in the stack that are built on all of these other things. The idea and the strategy, and remember, IBM's only been at this for like 2 years.
That's crazy, by the way. You guys seem to be so far behind it. You're so far ahead. How'd you do that?
Right. Well, I mean, if you think about it, blockchain has only enterprise blockchain, right? And, kind of the blockchain for the mainstream has really, truly only been around for at most 3 years, right? I mean, it started and then it became a formal kind of business unit operating entity within IBM, 2.5 years ago. So it really is just starting. But the idea is that we're focusing on these use cases that we talked about before, the flow of, tracking and facilitating the more efficient flow of goods, the more efficient flow of information, and the more efficient flow of value. And if you look at these three solutions that we have, they're really aligned to those three things, right? So they're kind of higher level in the conceptual stack. We've obviously got a whole range of enabling technologies and services underneath that. But if we look at the practical application of those technologies, those three things are there: the flow of goods, the flow of information, the flow of value. And Worldwire is, that solution that's focused on the flow of value. So yeah, our strategy and our roadmap over time is to integrate these things so that the flow of value, or the ability to transfer value within these other networks, can be integrated by this same solution. That's definitely part of our strategy and our strategic roadmap. Is it there yet? Not yet. We're working on it. But, so will it be XLM? Could be, yeah. Or it could be, a stable coin that a bank who participates on one of these networks decides or negotiates with the other participants of the networks that they're going to provide, or multiple, stable coins that allows, different participants in different parts of the world to say, I'm going to settle on, on US dollars, or I'm going to settle on euros, or I'm going to settle in, you name it, Japanese yen or whatever. And Worldwire provides that flexibility to be able to support that. And so that's our, that's our strategy going forward. So TradeLens is really focused on the flow of information for trade related activities. That, a Food Trust is really focused on the flow of goods, and Worldwire is really focused on the flow of value.
That's fascinating. It sounds to me that it's not you're making it up as you go, but you don't really have a benchmark to other than benchmark against yourselves. So in the business community that's listening in, Jesse, how do you do something that's never been done? And we always say that you don't create more followers, you create more leaders. So internally with your team, you've got a lot of smart people working with you. How do you set goals that are realistic when you want to follow competition, but you have no competition? So how do you manage that with the press, the comments, the Reddits, and you're getting excited about the industry yourself? Like, how do you manage all this?
Well, part of it comes down to culture, and I'll say this: IBM's, it's an old company; it's been around 108 years. But the way that the senior executive leadership team has looked at this, blockchain focus is to really allow it to run like a startup. And I think that's so important, because if you create the culture of a startup, which is really what it feels like a startup that's happening inside of a big company. Now, obviously there's processes that need to be followed, but to try and minimize that while still, adhering to the core, whatever risk profiles of, a big 108-year-old company that they have to do, most of it comes from the creation of a culture that is conducive to, working and running like a startup. And then that attracts a whole bunch of different kinds of people. I mean, look at me. I came out of banking to go work for IBM. Who would have thought, 5 years ago? And you combine that with what IBM's already got, their legacy in service delivery in 170 countries around the world, their legacy in technology, innovation from, mainframes to quantum computing, right? And then IBM research. I mean, it's just a dream for someone like me to be able to come here and look at all of the resources that we have, and then to be given this gift of, hey, run this like a startup, be nimble, be agile. You're going to have to make changes, like you said, to changes in the industry. it's really the only way to do it. And that's the cool part about all of this.
It sounds like a lot of fun, but it also has a lot of accountability.
It does. And it's, I guess I'm the kind of leader, and the group that I've been building is one that emphasizes, the fun part of it. I mean, happy, smart people are productive, smart people. And we've been making just a ton of progress.
That's a great culture.
Long road ahead.
Well, I think from my side, and we were talking with Molly a little bit earlier on your team, and the world always wants to know where things are going. And I want my Lambo, and I want it now. Progress takes time. You look at your own story, your own cookbook. You came from the banking sector, but before that, you were in a theological university. And looking at the transition now of where you are and the legacy that IBM has, I look at your own legacy. What do you want your legacy to be as your son? One day when he's my age, I'm 35, when he's my age and he looks at his dad, what do you want to leave behind?
Well, first and foremost, I want him to embrace Ferrari over Lambo. Because,
Ferrari, that's my brain, by the way. I got a Ferrari in there.
I just have to say that. No, I'm a big Formula One fan, so let me
All
just say
right,
that.
that's good. I like it. Ferrari over Lambo.
Right. So no, but in all seriousness, I think very infrequently do we have the opportunity to participate in something, at its foundational or groundbreaking level that has such a potential to reach, so many people. And I think we who live in the USA, we're, as a general, category of people in the world, we're very fortunate.
We take it for granted.
Yeah, we do, unfortunately. And, as the father of kids, we're trying, at least I and I suspect you are trying to instill values, and also expose our children and future generations to the fact that, there are billions of people in the world, most of them children, who literally live below the poverty line, right? That means like they live on less than $3 a day. Can you even fathing that? I mean,
it shouldn't be happening.
More than $3 on coffee this morning.
Well,
right. And so here we are at being able to participate in something that has tangible and tangible connectivity to a group of people who right now we almost can't even relate to, right? The unbanked, as we call them, and this whole notion of financial inclusion. So I would love my legacy to be able, even if I'm not famous for, creating anything other than to say I can point back and say, hey, I participated in this thing, son, that you now use that you don't even think about it. But in the old days, we used to paper things with these really weird green paper things, and we don't do that anymore. But guess what? When you hear about somebody who is in need in, I don't know, pick an emerging economy in Africa or something like that, you can transfer value to them that they can spend immediately from your phone.
It's life-changing.
Right, I mean, it is.
You're solving problems, true problems.
The human component to this, I think, is what's really exciting from a legacy.
That's amazing, and I hear the way you say it. You have something that unfortunately a lot of people in the world have almost become anesthetized to or desensitized to, and that is having empathy. Having empathy for others that haven't been as privileged as you. So I sit on a board called the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. It's one of the largest refugee and settlement agencies in the United States. And before I joined the board, I had the typical response of, hey, look, why throw them back or kick them back over? And well, why? Because the media had told me, well, they're all bad people. These are all villains. And as I dug in, I went, wow, kind of like earlier with Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett, that the more facts I had saying, you're telling me they're not all bad people? You're telling me that many of them have literally spent every dollar and owe other people money and traveled 1,000 and 2,000 miles to live here? Yeah. You're kidding me. These are the most resilient people on the planet. We don't want them to live here? These are the workers. These are the theologians. These are the doctors and the scientists. These are those that'll find the future cures for the things that just are going to kill you and kill me. Why would you not want the most resilient of us here? And it starts with empathy of the fact that IBM has this empathy for those children. There's 430,000 children just in the United States alone today that are in foster care. And I told you guys a little bit earlier about my story. And for me, 1987 and 1988, I lived in a foster care. In this case, it really was, and it was an orphanage called Casa de Amparo. Michael Loeb, co-founder of Priceline.com, also Synapse, was on last week, and he made an announcement on the show that his house, I'm sure you've seen it on the TV show Billions, he is going to be donating his house for a weekend at an upcoming gala fundraiser at Casa de Amparo in November. Details will be on lifestuff.com. We're raising money for these children that, for no fault of their own, they're born into a country where $3 a day, that barely feeds their stomachs. So it's giving back, and I find that the crypto community is they're looking for other ways to give back. It seems to be this empathy, this community that realizes there are problems, but there are solutions. So 2 more questions for you. I know I've taken my 45 minutes, and this is going to come from another one of these really cool names, Jesse. Enquistx, ENQVISTX. As it is, none of the assets issued in Worldwire are available to any other companies, users, entities on the network other than Worldwire clients. The tokens are restricted by the authorization required flag into the constraints of an IBM walled garden. Therefore, sadly, nobody in the Stellar ecosystem benefits from Worldwire, other than it being a nice poster child and giving the network credibility. With that in mind, do you have a plan or idea or roadmap to transition Worldwire into a more open system? And how likely is it that we're going to see Worldwire assets, fiat currency tokens, CBDC tokens, float freely and without segmentation by artificial boundaries on the network in the future? I did a pretty good job reading that. That was a long one.
You did. That's a long one, and multiple parts to that one. So, to the latter part of how likely is it that we'll see, kind of Worldwire issued assets, in the future, I think very likely. That's kind of the whole point of this. Now, but to get back to the first part of that question, this concept of a walled garden, the person issuing the question is right in a way. And it goes back to what we had talked about earlier about being able to identify the source of value that moves into the network. We have to guard against that because it's to the benefit of of all participants on Stellar, let alone on Worldwire, to be able to do that, right? And there has to be some intermediary, as few as intermediaries as possible, providing that. I think. But here's the thing. It's free to join Worldwire, right? Well, we don't charge anything to join it. So anybody can join it. So why not join and be a part of it and take advantage of that ecosystem of digital assets, right? I mean, rather than standing outside of the walled garden, it's kind of like, come on in, and join the party, right? And and now there are some minimum criteria right now. Again, regulators in all of these different countries that we're trying to provide endpoints to, have some rules. But again, as the regulators get more comfortable, as they start to come in, as they see that there's an improvement in transparency, there's an improvement in user experience and cost, and the ultimate benefactors, at least in our initial use case and market segmentation around, the noble mission of the migrant worker and cross-border remittances, they're going to be supportive of this notion of be more open, be more transparent. That's what we're about. So we're not, preaching one thing and doing another. We're just on this progression to go there. But, we're putting our money where our mouth is, right? It does not cost anything to join Worldwire, right? And that's, something that should be resoundingly heard.
Yeah, that's a big one.
We're not trying to sell you a piece of software.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you guys are just handing it off and saying, all right, it's on you now, that you're actively integrating and you're not charging them to do so, but you have rules and written restrictions. So this is back to a personal question. You've come a long way in your life. I always like to know, who's the toughest person you know? Who got you here? Who was I didn't want to let him down, or I didn't want to let her down? Who would that be in Jesse's world?
Wow. For me, first and foremost, it would be my wife, and I'm not just saying that because I think she might listen in, although she might. But she's an inspiration to me, and she sees things very clearly. I tend to want to make everybody happy, and she is one who sees kind of the right thing to do right up front, and for me it takes a while to get around to that. So she's been an anchor for me in that respect. And then I've been lucky in my career. I mean, I spent a lot of time, 18 years at Wells Fargo. Before that, I had a few years out of college in entrepreneurial settings, and I've just had some really some really good mentors over the years. And Wells Fargo was an amazing place to work. And there's a couple of bosses there that I look back on that, when I first started working for them, I hated them. They were so hard to work for, but then in hindsight, they really instilled a sense of responsibility in me. I think it bears mention one guy that falls into that. I'm not sure if he'll ever listen to this. I think he's still at Wells Fargo, but his name is Jeffrey Klein. Jeffrey Klein was the hardest guy to work for. Yeah,
he was a tough one, huh?
In Minneapolis, tough one. And I look back in history, and he was the best boss I ever had in history. He gave me so much, in terms of discipline and just a sense of how to.
He
do
knew you could
right.
give more. Yeah, he looked at you and said, "I want more for you than you want for yourself, Jesse. I see greatness in you."
Yeah. So I mentioned his name not to zero him out, but
Jeffrey Klein, Minneapolis.
He's one of the best ones.
That's really cool.
I think he's still around. I don't think he's retired yet. I hope not, but I know he's doing good things.
Well, I'll find him, and then as I send you off, I know we're not making any big announcements today, but if and when you do, I would love to come see your office and meet your team, and maybe be one of the people who gets to tell that big announcement. So I hope you guys can think that over for me.
Well, we definitely will, and the office will either be in Southern California and it'll be in Singapore, which is our two primary operating locations. So we'll have to pick one. But, yeah, we will keep that in mind.
Very cool.
There's always new stuff coming.
All right. Any final thoughts, Jesse, before I let you go?
No, but, Justin, thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed being able to kind of connect, the fabric of work with, kind of social good and personal ambition and legacy. So I think what you're doing here on this podcast is really cool. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Well, thanks. And remember, everybody, life's tough, but Jesse's wife is tougher. Thanks again for joining us, Jesse.
All right. Take care. Thanks, Dustin.
All right. See ya. I'd like to again thank Jesse Lund for joining us today. Jesse's insight into cryptocurrency and into the world of leadership brings such an insight. I've been passionate about the world of digital assets now for going on about 7 years. And being able to talk to Jesse, bringing additional clarity into where things are going. And for me to be able to see that Jesse Lund is just like us. He's a man with a purpose, a man with a mission, a man that wants to bring a legacy, not just to his children, but to the children around the world. That while life's tough, you can be tougher, but it takes a village. We'd like to again thank our newest sponsor, Cloud Ibis. You may know that companies have long struggled to deliver IT applications and services efficiently. Many are deciding to use the cloud to solve these challenges. Unfortunately, many of today's leading cloud providers are just enriching themselves, while their customers are only getting bad cases of buyer's remorse. Now it's time to reimagine the cloud with Cloud Ibis, the platform that enables you to own the cloud and sell off your idle resources through a unique blockchain marketplace, exchange, and community portal. We call it the People's Cloud. Own your environment and never lose control again. Start your free trial today by visiting www.cloudivus.com. That's www.cloudivus.com. Life's tough, but the cloud doesn't have to be. It's been terrific to have this fascinating conversation with our special guest, Jesse Lund, Vice President for Blockchain and Digital Currencies at IBM. So that wraps up our show for this evening. Thank you again, Jesse, for making this another outstanding episode for our Life's Tough podcast. And thanks to you, our amazing audience, for making the Life's Tough podcast one of the most relevant and fastest growing shows around. Also, a special thanks to my dear friend, Gerald Levin, Life's Tough chief writer and my Sherpa. The stories we all hear are as varied as the people who tell them. Each time I hear someone's personal account, I do not frame it as something that was more horrible than my own story, or something that was not as bad as what I went through. It's impossible to discount the impact of any one singular experience. To the person who lived it, that story is just as devastating as any other. I ask you to use your story to give others hope. It's quite liberating to move beyond your past. Don't keep your story to yourself and allow it to eat away at you. Instead, consider how your experience can benefit somebody else. Your story may be just what it takes to help someone in your circle or in our community to get through a tipping point moment. An instance where that person either chooses to continue to be a victim or when that person finds the strength to transcend a particular situation. Please subscribe to our show. Visit lifestuff.com, lifestough.com, and be sure to join us every week, same time, same place, for a stimulating hour of heartfelt discussions. Remember, everyone has a story. Thank you for listening and have a great week. So for the entire Life's Tough team, this is Dustin Plantholt signing off. Remember, life's tough, but Jesse Lund's wife is tougher. Take care, everybody.